for breaking the silence. You asked for it, and we have our panelists who is ready to answer the questions. I am Elder Joanne Cadogan of Word of Faith, Pastor Jonathan and Trika Brown. So before we go any further, I just want you to just get ready, get your mind, your heart ready, get your pen, your paper, and let's begin to write down. So let us go to the Father in prayer at this moment. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this hour. We thank you for this day. We thank you for giving us the opportunity to come back, oh God, and to empower your servants, your children of God. Tonight, I pray that you will open up their minds and open up their hearts that they may receive. Wherever darkness lies, God, let your light forever shine. And God, most of all, we're going to give you the glory through this session. In the mighty name of Jesus, amen. I will now introduce our facilitator to you. She is a member of Word of Faith, and she is very, very active in her field. Carol Grant, I gave a whole history last time. I am not about to go through the history again. Her life speaks for herself. So therefore, you can talk about a person, but if their walk don't line up with it, but her walk lines up to the life that she lives. She's quite knowledge, and believe me, tonight you will see her gifts in action. Now I turn it over in the hands of our host for tonight, Sylvia Carol Grant. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elder Cadogan, for that beautiful, beautiful introduction. And at this time, I would like to introduce the ladies who will be joining me this evening, the panelists. We also, on part one, did our lengthy introductions, so I'll keep it pretty simple. But first, I would like to introduce Pastor Winsome McLean. She is a licensed mental health and family therapist, and she is the founder and owner of Soul Care Institute. Also, we have Dr. Janelle Yates. She is a certified school counselor with Palm Beach County School District, and she is an adjunct instructor for counselor education with Palm Beach Atlantic University. And last but not least, we have Miss Rebecca Talton. She is a team leader with Florida Power and Light, and she is also a mentor in the community. She specializes in organizational leadership, and she is one that is a good life skills coach. So welcome again, ladies, for part two of Breaking the Silence, a conversation on spiritual, educational, and social mental health. So tonight, you all, we have something a little special for you all. We're going to actually start out with a mental health video. So if you're on your iPads, your laptops, or phones, we would like for you all to view this screen really quick, and then we will go ahead and dive into part two. All righty. So, as it said, let's talk. We know that mental health is pretty much on how we think, how we feel, and how we interact emotionally and socially and behaviorally. So, to start out tonight, let's discuss a little terminology associated with mental health and in our social and educational viewpoints. So, we're going to start there. So let's just have an open discussion on the terminology associated socially and educationally.
So I guess I'll go first with, I think there's some terms that we've heard now. It's become more prevalent that people talk about mental illness. So you might hear people, referring to others as being bipolar or schizophrenic, or they have anxiety or depression or OCD. But when you talk about social, I always think about how we as people have brought the shame to the illness with the things that we call it. Crazy being at the top of the list, calling somebody, if somebody acts out of sort or they're known to have a behavior that's unusual to most people, calling them cray cray, saying that they're nuts, they're cuckoo. All of these things are negative terms that we've heard and we've all used at one point or the other, even in a joking manner when someone acts differently. And I think that that's what's tied the stigma to the silence that's tied to mental illness, because who wants to be called crazy?
Right. Agreed. Totally agree.
I also, along with those terms that were used by Ms. Talton, also PTSD. A lot of times we refer to or usually equate that with soldiers. But it is also, anyone can have PTSD, and it could be any number of things that can cause PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. Also, educationally, we'll see a lot of attention deficit disorder, ADD, which is attention, that's what I just said, sorry, and ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We also see some conduct disorder, emotional behavioral disorders are also pretty prevalent that we see educationally. And a lot of more, we're seeing students with anxiety. And I think that's just our society at this moment, especially now.
I agree. Totally agree.
And just the one that I wanted to highlight is self-harm. We call it cutting or, things like that, but it's really doing harm to yourself to kind of cause a certain chemical response, right? So doing harm to self, cutting yourself or your wrist, your arm, your leg, wherever. That's a terminology that we should be familiar with because it is becoming more and more prevalent in our society. So I just wanted to highlight that one.
It really is. And that's socially and educationally because I see it daily in education. At this time, if you are a parent and you are viewing, we're going to post a poll about the different terminology. If you are aware, yes or no. So it's a yes or no poll. If you are aware that your child has mandatory mental health lessons provided at the school. And we wanted to get just a little feedback to see where you all stand on that, because we know that it is sent out home, sometimes either via email or it is also sent home with your child as a handout. And it's something that was started this year so that parents are aware of the different terms associated with mental health. So just check yes or no And we just wanted to get a little feedback from you all. And we'll give you all a little moment. Okay. All right. So moving forward, and we'll come back and see about those results to that poll. And while we're talking about education, what risk factors do we see socially and educationally with mental health dynamics? So what are some risk factors that we see or we should be able to look for socially and educationally?
For social, what we see a lot is students who withdraw from their friends or family. You'll see a change in their behavior when it comes to that. Also, it may be their change in interaction with one specific person. They may start to act differently around the person, and you may notice that. Also, grades may change drastically. It might be that the grades drop, or they also may go in the opposite direction and get better. But there's still something maybe behind that. Even though that's a good thing, you may still want to check and see, is there something going on that's caused this drastic change, especially if it's very drastic. And then also frustration with learning or frustration with concentration in class. So those are just some of the things that, I can think of.
Okay.
I came from the different angle of it. Like when I interpreted the question, I was thinking about things that, or risk factors which would cause or affect mental health or the mental health dynamic. So where she's giving the symptom, I was saying what could cause those things socially. Peer pressure, fear from social media, a lot of things that the young people are negatively impacted by is what people think about them on social media. And so how that impacts them in their mental health status. I mean, we've heard of children who commit suicide based on what people thought about them on social media. So that's a big one. Stress in the workplace, stress in life, and the stress right now because of the global pandemic that we're facing and the social injustice that we're facing, that could cause people to be negatively impacted or change the health dynamic. Isolation, people are now having to isolate, and some people have a lot of people around them. Some people are at home by themselves. And what does that do to somebody's psyche? How does that affect somebody in their mental status when they have normally been around people and could communicate with people and they don't have that engagement? That could change your whole dynamic on a mental scale. Poor choices in relationships, how we connect with people, not just in male-female type relationship or relationships, period. If you've made poor selections in who you associate with, that could also affect your health, mental health dynamic.
That's really good. Really good.
Yeah, and I wanted to speak to it again, drilling down a little bit further. I love the way that this just kind of progressed. I want to look at, because I know that in a little while we'll talk a little bit more about adverse childhood experiences. But what's at the core of some of those things are things like violence, discrimination, poverty. These things are contributors to how it is that, whether it's our young people or adults, how we show up in the world. And so when we talk about the economic disparages and things like that, those things are also contributing, because if a mom is at home and she doesn't know how she's going to feed her child, and they keep coming to her and asking her to meet these needs and she can't, right? That natural reaction to slap or to hit or whatever, can begin to be that catalyst for future trauma and things like that. So there are also some systemic things that we have to look at as well when we think about those risk factors also.
I totally agree. Which what Pastor Winsome is talking about is the ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences, which leads into our next question. there are many adverse childhood experiences. So let's talk about some of those experiences. Let's kind of list some of those so that our viewers know what those are and what specific areas do they play a major part in one's life mentally. So we can go from
So
there.
I can jump on that one real quick and just kind of break the, just let me preface it by saying there are a plethora of
Right.
adverse childhood experiences. When we talk specifically around the ACEs, it really focuses on 10 areas. And so this is how the 10 areas are really broken down. So we have household dysfunction, and what falls under that are things like substance abuse, parental divorce and separation, mental illness, if there was a person in the household that had a mental illness diagnosis or not a diagnosis, a battered partner, a battered mother or battered father, because it could be mother or father, and criminal behavior. So those fall under family dysfunction. Then we have abuse, and under abuse, we have psychological, physical, and sexual. And then we have neglect. And under neglect, we have emotional and physical. So those are really the way in which the ACEs breaks down our childhood experiences. That's a loaded question to tackle, how it impacts us as adults, because there's so many different ways in which these adverse experiences can impact us. But what I will say is definitely our mental health, definitely our social interactions, and then also our physical health. And I know that we'll get an opportunity, hopefully, to talk about that as well. But when you see 4 or more ACEs, yeses on that ACEs assessment, you can see that there's a direct correlation between a person's physical health, so their medical health, as it relates to what they went through as a child. So we can see that there are long-standing, pervasive impacts that a person can experience because of the fact that they have experienced these childhood experiences, adverse experiences.
Yeah, that's so true. That is so true.
I think she really blanketed it really well. I mean, there's not a whole lot you could add to that. I would say that when I thought about the effects, she said it right. There could be so many different effects. I thought about insecurity and low self-esteem, promiscuity, addictive behavior, because if your parents were addicted to something, it may not manifest in the same addiction, but you may come out with a different addiction because you've known that pattern of a lifestyle. It could cause depression. A lot of different systematic things could come from all of that trauma that you've been exposed to. But one of the things I think that is so important when we talk about mental health is that when we see the surface of it and we see the outcome of what has happened, it's so important that we're hearing what she's saying, because you got to dig deeper, because people are not just insecure or negative or sad all the time or have anxiety attacks just because. There's a deeper rooted issue, and I'm glad that she went through those things to say, hey, it comes from somewhere. I think that would change our whole view on how we look at illness, and maybe allow us to get closer connected so we can investigate or talk to people to kind of go further to see, where is this coming from?
Yes. I totally agree with you, because it's very deeply rooted. A lot of the things, as she said, the physical neglect, the child abuse, sexual abuse, it all is deeply rooted from a lot of those things that may have happened, or even being witnessed to. So how does one identify these different mental health concerns, even just in general, when you don't really know what to look for?
Well, one of the things I would say, and this is just something minor, is minor, but it can be big if you're paying attention to it. Sometimes people that you know say things to you, and they notice things that you may not notice in yourself. and they may try to touch on it with you, and you may not really listen to it, but at some point they may get serious with you and say to you, look, this is something you need to check into, because I think this might be an issue for you. And you may hear it from different people, and hearing the same thing from different people sometimes tells you, hey, maybe I need to check into this, because a lot of times we are in denial of things that we may know can be an issue for us, but we choose to ignore it, or to just brush it off as oh, I just act crazy sometimes, or I just do this sometimes, because these people keep bothering me, and I hate when they do that to me. So I would say, listening to other people, especially multiple different people telling you the same thing.
Right. Because there's a pattern and there's a history of things that are reoccurring.
Right.
So then that lets us know that the alert, like, something's going on.
I think we're more inclined to want to hear good things. Like when people repeat good things about our character, we're all about it. We're like, I knew it, and I can hear it. But for sure, I don't know where I've heard it before, but they said if you've heard it from 2 or more people and it's the same thing, you need to take note of it, especially when it's a corrective behavior that needs to take place. But one of the things that I thought about is that where it comes to us not knowing what it looks like, we need to become educated about it. I mean, the information is out there. You don't have to be educated in the field of mental health awareness or mental health issues to get information on it. And the only way that we can help ourselves is by getting educated about it, so that we know what to look for. For some of us, we've just been exposed to it in certain ways, and so we got to know it by trial and error. But I think that the more you get exposed to it, the more you want to know about it, so that you can be in a position to help people and kind of guide them to where they need help, especially if we're involved with children. I think about children a lot because, I love children. So how do we figure that out? I think we have to be able to educate ourselves so we can know what things to look for. And I think also it comes through connected relationship. You won't find it out by bypassing people and just having casual conversation. You have to get connected with people. And the more questions you ask in more settings that you're with people, you find out more and more, and you're able to kind of piece things together.
I totally agree with you. Go ahead.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, yes, absolutely right. But again, we are in such an information age that there really is no reason for that to be the response.
Right.
Even if we have to reach out to someone and say, listen, this is what I see a family member doing, or this is what my sister's doing, or what have you. What are your thoughts around that? But we should not have that default response anymore, because there's no need for it. We Google everything else. You Google how to do them lashes and the eyebrows. Like, we can Google what are some traits of depression? You know what I mean? So, utilize the tools that we have. And once you get that back information, and because you have a relationship, then it's a little bit easier to approach that person to say, hey, this is what I've been noticing. You tell me what's going on. Always, give them an opportunity to say yay or nay. Don't go to them and be like, you are this. No.
I checked it out online.
Don't do that.
Definitely go to a professional.
But I observe, right? You tell me, talk to me, tell me about this. And it takes a lot more pressure off of the conversation.
Yeah, it really does, because, and I like what you both said about you have to be around people and spending time with people too, to notice, and whether that's going to church, in the classroom, or a close friend or a family member, you're around that person a lot, so you'll notice things. Like, and some other things that you'll notice is, like, sometimes if you see them hallucinating, having strange thoughts and saying different things that kind of don't sync and line up right, having feelings of extreme highs and then extreme lows, sadness, irritable, being very irritable, Those are signs and things to watch for in others that are connected to you or that you see on a daily basis. And you like, okay, something's wrong. So those are some other things, you know, that we can identify or one can identify if you don't even really know the depths of mental health. But you know when some things are off with, you know, with people generally who you're around a lot. Which is a good segue into our next question about when we know that one in our family, our spouse, a family member, friend, or what have you, if we know that counseling is actually needed and some things within them need to kind of be realigned. Um, and we've identified them, kind of like we said, we've been around them. How do we let them know that, hey, it's time that you need counseling? Like, how do you express that need to them? What are some things that you may, or ways you may go to them in regards to it?
One of the things that I would say is, especially for couples, right, that are listening, I would say that each individual has their own stuff that they bring to the relationship. And one of the ways to really handle this is to normalize that. When we villainize one person in the relationship, it causes the other to become defensive. And so when we can approach it from the perspective of, for the health of the relationship, can we both do some work? It takes, again, the pressure off, because we always want to approach these situations from a place of strength, right? From a place of understanding, always knowing in the back of your mind that if this is worded wrong, there is going to be some resistance. And that resistance might prevent us from ever getting to the place that we need to get to. One of the major things that couples experience is that they get into an argument before they even realize what the other person needed. And that totally interferes with the expectation. Sorry, that was for free. But when you approach it from the perspective of, we both have issues, and
Right.
we want to do this for the viability of the marriage, the viability of the relationship. Let's take that step together, right, and do this together. I think it really helps to take the pressure off.
I think that is so funny that you, especially at the tail end of it, when you went, especially that you address couples. I appreciate that. I'll be married 31 years in August. So we all, we can't stay married that long and not have to have some bumps in the road. And so I think that the emphasis has to be not on who is at fault or who is wrong, but what is wrong. And how we can work together to work towards fixing that issue. I have gone through marital counseling, and I know for our men of color, they're not having it. They're not having it. They're not having it.
Exactly.
And so I took this one very personally, and I thought, how was it that I got him to that place? And I think that it was that I shared my heart, and I said, look, we have need. We did not make it this far without, the help of God, first of all. But even with the best of marriages, at some point you start to know that you need a neutral person that could come in and get us realigned. I love that, realigned. We needed a realignment. And so we're not going to someone to say, okay, it's your fault that we're here, or it's your fault that I feel this way. We're coming together to get with someone who can have us to do our work individually so that we can realign our marriage and be on the same page like we were before. And so I think that was perfect. I think that you just really have to be, if it's a brother, a sister, a mom and a daughter, a father and a son, it's really sharing your heart and letting them know this is not a meeting or a series of meetings to find wrong in you or find fault in anyone. It's to get something corrected in the relationship so that we can move forward.
Also, I think sometimes when you have a situation where a person or a couple, they recognize that there's an issue and they don't know how to actually deal with it, and just coming to terms that things would be better either mentally and physically, for in some cases, that is the reason, one of the main reasons to get help, instead of being unhappy, or being sad, or feeling like there's no hope for the situation. So that should be the main reason. But again, as both of the ladies said, coming to that person with care and concern, and just wanting to bet the best for them, and helping them to understand that that is the only more of the reason why you came to them, and seeing that there's a need for that.
And I would just want to also say that, like, for parents, that it is okay for you to submit to what you're asking your children to submit to. It makes it so much easier for them to sit with a stranger and talk with them about what's going on with them, when you yourself are willing to participate in that process. It makes it so much more difficult when you drop them off and say, go take care of my child. So don't ask them to do something that you yourself are not willing to submit to.
Correct.
I agree. This is so good. And I like how you all each said, you go to them and you approach them with empathy. That is really good. And sometimes we will have to prepare for resistance. But we know, that we're going in it with a good heart. And even sometimes too, it's always good too to always have a backup and a plan ready to go. So when you go to that person, you say, hey, I've identified this about you, and also try to say, hey, and I've identified this about me. So we're going to go into this together, and already have a plan in place, because when you bring it to them, they're like, okay, it's always good to bring a solution, even though you identify these things within. So that's really, really good. At this time, we'll pause for a minute and take a couple of viewer questions. Minister Sharita.
Yes, we have a few questions. The first question, I'm going to stick with what we were just talking about, then I'll ask the other one. How do you share your heart without hurting feelings? How do you share your heart without hurting feelings?
Talk to a person in the way that you'd like to have it reciprocated. I think that, first of all, we know before going in what might be hurtful to another person. So being careful and guarded with your words, and just thinking, if it was the roles were reversed and this person were saying this to me, how would I be impacted and how would I feel about it? Will help you in how you organize and are deliberate about what you say. I think it's better to write it out so you can read it back aloud to yourself to see how it sounds, because we let emotions get very caught up. And when we start to talk, when emotions get caught up, we say a lot of things that we cannot undo. And so it's better for you to have a plan of having it written down. Even if you don't feel like you can verbally commit to it without getting the emotions caught up that will make you say a lot that you shouldn't say, maybe you give it to them in the form of a letter. Let them have a time to read over it, and then you come back together to discuss it. Because once you say it, you can't undo it.
Right.
And I think, yes, that speaks to you using your best mechanism of communication. For some people, verbal communication is not their best,
Not the best.
way of expressing themselves. So you have to identify what is your best way of self-expression. For some people, it's art, and you can absolutely turn art into a conversation. So just understand that it doesn't have to be that traditional way. It can be as creative as it needs to be, that really fits who you are as a person. And understanding too that, sharing your heart is sharing your heart. Everyone is not going to necessarily agree with what your heart is experiencing. That does not mean that you should not share your heart. That just means that that individual, they have to learn how it is to receive you. But many times I think that's why we stay silent. It's because people don't know how to handle our expressions. And just because they don't know how to handle it, that is not a ticket for you to check out and not to express it. So if you know that you're expressing it in a loving, kind way, and you're sharing your truth, you have to continue to share your truth. And maybe one day it will resonate and something will change.
That's really good.
Yes, like Pastor Winsome said, what I was going to say is the same type of thing, is where, you know, they may not receive it, and you may not intend for it to be hurtful, but it still does, depending on how they receive it. So you still have to go forward and, you know, do what you think is best, and at least express how you're feeling from your heart.
Wonderful. Awesome answers. Another question along the line: how do you change the narrative to get an individual to go to therapy when they think it's for white people or weak people or crazy people? How do you change that narrative?
I'm neither white, weak, or crazy. I'm none of those things. Oh, goodness. But I think it's in spaces like these where, you know, folks are exposed to this type of conversation that we begin to normalize that for everyone. You know, honestly, I have a fair amount of Caucasian clients, and they are the people that will stay in therapy for as long as they need to. They're not really moved by, you know, how long it has been. They just know, some of the ones that I see, they just know that this is what I need for my sanity, you know. And there are moms that will come and sit and be like, yo, this is my drink for the week, because it prevents me from having to go visit Jack Daniels. You know, we sit down and we have a conversation. So again, I don't know how much more communicating we can do to allow individuals to know that that is a false narrative. I think it's not until we get to a place where we're in desperate need of help, right, that you know, we can embrace a different narrative. I don't know. I hope so, though. I hope that in these spaces, people are seeing that we all need help. We all need support. And that's godly. God said it was not good for us to be alone. He didn't intend for us to do life in isolation. And so sometimes that means that I need to talk to somebody who is not my grandmother, who is not my auntie, who is not Susie Q down the street. Because they can't help me. They can't help me. I need somebody else who can actually sit down and help me to put the pieces of my life together.
I think too, also, one of the things that we use with the students is letting them know that there are some celebrities and musicians and actors and actresses who seek help, and that they suffer from some of the mental illnesses that we discuss with them. So even though that's something minor, you may want to find someone that person connects with and says, hey, you know, this person goes and does this, or, and like you say, even using yourself, or even saying, you know, just give it a try. And if it doesn't work, you know, find somebody different, because not every person you seek for therapy or start out with therapy is the one that works for you. You may have to try someone different.
All righty. Thank you, Minister Sharita, for those questions, and we'll be back with you shortly for some more questions. You all keep those questions coming. We will have another portion where we will answer some of those questions. And since we stopped on students, I do have a question that I want to kind of go back to with mental health disorders. And we know that they can affect the students, and even in the classroom, they affect the learning and the social interactions. Both are very critical, you know, for the success of the child. How can teachers, administrators, and even parents help with some of these frustrations and concerns?
I think one of the main things is communication between all parties. Um, you have you have to remember back in the time when we were in traditional school. Now we're not so much if we go back to virtual, but in traditional school, when we're in the class, teachers see the students probably more amount of time throughout the day than their parents do. So sometimes they'll see and observe things that parents don't have time with them to see. And with teachers seeing that, I know sometimes some teachers, there are times when you're overwhelmed and you don't have time to pay attention to everybody. But there are times when you notice things about individual students and you say, hey, something's not right about that. Teachers need to say something to the parents or ask questions, or if they're concerned that the parent is not the right person to go to someone, a counselor at the school, or an administrator. Administrators will get you to, who you need to. In the same token, parents, if you see something that you're concerned about, you're not sure, who to go to. Even if it's not related to school, go to the school counselor at the school and say, this is what I'm concerned about. Can you help me with this? Because that's what we're there for. If we can't help you with it, we can refer you to someone else. Administrators, the same thing. If they see anything of concern, it's letting each other know. And if you have a child at home that you already know is diagnosed with a mental illness or some type of disorder, please let your school know, because even though you may be embarrassed about it or you may not want everybody in the school to know, at least let one person at the school know, so that they are aware of it, and so that things, if something happens or something changes, they kind of have an idea of what's happening. But being in the dark and then some things happen, you're not sure where to go from there. And I'm sure Ms. Grant, you can attest to that in some cases.
I totally can, and I totally agree with you, because even with the question, when you feel like your child has a mental disorder, or even as an administrator, if you're on here viewing, parent, guardian, whomever is connected, let the counselors know. We do have what is called a exceptional student education contact person, but making sure you let the counselors know, because they can let you know what the next steps are you need to take. Because if you think that they have something else going on mentally, sometimes they may need to see a pediatrician, so that they can refer them out, maybe even sometimes to a psychiatrist, and just to do different school psychologists or what have you, to do different extra assessments, because if they do have those different mental disabilities or disorders or what have you, we have some things that which are called like 504s, where we can have accommodations made for the students in the class, so that the teacher specifically knows, like, okay, I know that I need to modify some things for this student. So just making sure you communicate with assistant principals, the counselors, things of that nature, because they can help you come up with a plan and direct you in the place that you need to go. Because don't just let the child suffer, of course, in silence when you see all these things that we're talking about, these different factors, risk factors, all of those, the different symptoms of, make sure you say something. Don't suffer in silence. Say something. Which leads to symptoms, trauma. What are some signs? What are some of those signs? And I know some of these things a little overlap a little bit, but what are some signs and symptoms of trauma that parents and even adults just in general can look for?
Some of the more common signs are things like, and this is, let's just frame it as far as, your child just had an experience, they just had an encounter. What might you look for that would indicate to you that they have suffered some level of trauma? So things like shock. If you notice that they have withdrawn from yourself or from others, this feeling of anxiety or fear, shame or self-blame, when they kind of blame themselves for what has just taken place, especially if it was totally and completely outside of their control. There's probably some level of trauma that's going on there. Disbelief, difficulties concentrating, or feeling that numbness, or like that disassociative type of experience where life is kind of happening without them. That's some of the common symptoms of trauma. And also to the extreme, we have like the mood swings or the feelings of hopelessness. Those are very, very important. Because the mood swings really is indicative for that inability to control their emotions. So we want to really pay close attention to those. Hopelessness is a very, very close to suicidality. You're kind of knocking on suicide's door when you have that feeling of hopelessness, because that's that feeling that nothing is ever going to change. So why should I even be here? So those are some of the symptoms of, or the signs of trauma.
I think that, well, she, again, covered a great multitude and all of it. I thought for on an adult perspective, something that you might see in the workplace is that people start to miss work. They're not showing up for work, or
Right.
when they are at work, they can't gain a focus. They're like not, they're out of sync with what their normal work practices are and what they're supposed to be doing. They can't really focus to do. But I think she covered really all of the things that at least I came up with that you might see. That definitely, that uncontrolled emotional outbreaks, just
Yes.
crying for no reason. There's nothing sad. There's nothing
Yeah.
that's happened, and just having outbreaks of emotion or even anger.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, like she said, with the anger or the crying or being upset and not being able to explain why. When
Right.
you're asking why, it's like, I don't know, they can't really explain why. Nightmares sometimes we'll see, and this is more like you said, when trauma, is that just happened recent. Intrusive thoughts, some thoughts that come to you that are, you could just be in the middle doing something completely off from that, and then that thought comes to your mind. Confusion and insomnia, in some cases, not being able to sleep
Yeah.
or eat or eat sometimes.
Yeah, that was true. Those are all some good things. Like being guarded and, like you were saying, easily frightened and the trouble sleeping. And sometimes we may see the bedwetting, all of those different things, the mood symptoms changing. So those are definitely some signs. So we're going to shift gears a little bit. And one of the questions that I did want to ask was, how do we, or one as an adult, deal with an estranged relationship and move forward in life when childhood experiences have affected their relationships growing up, and specifically maybe mother and daughter or parental relationships, but we can leave it open to as well.
So this was a superly duperly awesome question. When I read it, I was like, oh, I love this question. and I love it because it really helps us to gain some clarity around our adult struggle as it relates to the relationships that we've had with our parents.
Mm-hmm.
Our fathers are the ones that really show us protection, provision, and they speak to our identity. So when you grow up and you feel that you don't know who you are, you have no sense of self, then probably something happened where there was not that reaffirming of who you are. And so with a lack of understanding of who we are, there comes the low self-esteem, the low sense of value, all of those things that attach to that. But you made it very specific here with the mother-daughter relationship. And so what do we get from our moms? We get from our mothers a sense of nurturing, a self of emotion management. It's our mothers that teach us how to manage our emotions. After our daddies fuss at us, you know, she come behind and she'll hug us and, you know, get us to calm down. And so there are those factors many times that moms really help to cultivate in us. But when I work with mothers and daughters, there are a couple of things that I ask them. These are questions that I ask them because I want them to identify the basis of their relationship. Is there some dismissiveness in the relationship? Is there some controllingness in the relationship? Who is unavailable in the relationship? Is there enmeshment in the relationship? I can't tell you from your mom because y'all just both, just one
Right.
bowl of oneness. Is there some combative situations? Are there some unreasonable or some unreliability that you have experienced? And was there a role reversal? So those are some things that I really want to look at when I'm dealing with mothers and daughters, because that helps me to understand the context of their relationship and where it is that that issue might be taking place. So again, when you look at the different roles that our parents play, and when there's a deficiency in those roles, they play out in our adult life, and they play out very, very clearly and very specifically. But again, you have to be able to make that connection. I know that was a long answer, but
That's okay.
it was a good question.
I think it was
We're dealing with it, and we want to know how do we deal with it?
I think it's a hard one too, because a mother-daughter relationship is so critical to so many other things. How that mother is then going to parent if she has children.
Yes.
And I wrote down first that fixing the broken pieces of relationships is a process that both people have to engage in and be connected to. And when you think about mothers and daughters and the division between mothers and daughters, I think the only way that they can get to a better place is that there has to be some really hard and honest conversations that have to happen between the mother and the daughter. Because a lot of the things that are passed along to the daughter that have been not the best things, the disconnect or the not being a nurturer, the broken pieces that she's passed along to her daughter came from something that happened to her. And if you want to break the cycle, you have to go to the hard place of telling the truth and having a real one-on-one conversation of how did we get here? Well, the only way you determine how you got where you are is if that mother's willing to share her heart and tell the things that she was exposed to with her own mother.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy win.
No.
No.
And I want to say, you know, as I told you all last time, television is my thing. So if you watch Ayanna, you'll see when she has those mother-daughter relationships on there, it always goes back, just like Ms. Talton said, to the mother and what happened with the mother. And it has to be that the mother and the daughter are willing to work together and be honest with each other. The mother may not realize there are things that happen in the past that affects her daughter. And until they have that discussion about it, there may have been ways that the mother was treated by the daughter that she didn't understand. But now, after they have that discussion, it's more clear. But in order to get to that place, like when the question basically says, how do you deal with it? You got to deal with that issue first that occurred. And then it's going to involve both the mother and the daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that is good. This was one of our questions that was posed to us from last time. So I wanted to make sure that I got it in this time around. And even just in general, with dealing with these strange relationships in life, period, from growing up, kind of like you all said, you have to, how you deal with that is you have to want to move forward. So that comes with the transforming and renewing our mind and saying, hey, I actually want to have a relationship with this person. So I feel once you come to grips with that, then we can move forward with the next step, because now we're going into developing a relationship, building a relationship. So we're really starting over. In a new way. So you have to want to, build that relationship with anybody if it's an estranged relationship, because of course we're going to have to deal with what happened before, but you have to want to be able to start over. So
And forgiveness has got to be at the beginning of it. When you talk about estranged relationships, you have to forgive on the basis of this person may never say they're sorry.
mm-hmm.
You just got to be willing to forgive. And
Yes.
depending on how great the offense will determine how your relationship will go forward. Your relationship may never be restored back to what it used to be. And you may need to be okay with your relationship being a whole different type of relationship, which is not necessarily connected, but it's not one that's at discord either.
That is so true. That is so true. This is all very, very, very good. I know our viewers are getting a lot out of this, because a lot of these questions that we're answering, it's a lot of things that we deal with on a daily basis that people are just not speaking up about or not talking about. They're walking around as if, these things aren't happening, and they're just going on with their daily lives and not getting the help that they need or knowing how to deal with it. So we just want you all to be able to deal with these things and get help and get better, so that you can be a productive citizen in this world. And that's pretty much what it's all about. Life, life in general. So, shifting gears a little bit again, want to deal with the spiritual part of this. And question I have is, what are some mental health misdiagnoses as it relates to spiritual gifts, or even spiritual experiences? Spiritual experiences or spiritual gifts? What are some mental health misdiagnoses when it comes to that?
This question jumped out at me because again, this is one of those things that we really don't talk about. Like, Carol, I'm like, girl, you just, Lord have mercy, you just went all the way in with these questions. But the one that first popped into my mind was schizophrenia. So an individual who has schizophrenia, many times they will experience auditory, visual hallucinations, things like that. And as a believer, yes, many of us, will audibly hear the Lord's voice. And so, again, I think I said it during part one, that it's so important for you to really be aware of who you're going to sit in front of, because you can absolutely be demonized and misunderstood if you use particular language, in the counseling space that is not familiar to your counselor. So it's very, very important that you don't end up in a situation where you are labeled schizophrenic because you go to your counselor and you say that, I was having a conversation with the Lord and he said I needed to go and make a right turn. I made the right turn. And then, and they're looking at you like, what in the world are you talking about? Right? So, again, I think this question just really speaks to, you have to be aware of the person that you are giving your soul issues to, and ensure that they can handle it from a spiritual perspective. So that's the one that kind of jumped out at me.
I totally agree with you. That one always, when I've been asked that question before, it jumps out to me as well, because of all that schizophrenia entails. And for people who don't know, a lot of people who are schizophrenic, they hear things, they see things, their feelings are a little off. So it can very well spiritually, we know when we're operating in our gifts and we're hearing from God, we're seeing things, as she said, and it can be almost on the same level, but just knowing the difference, and using wisdom, which God, gives that gift of wisdom, and knowing the difference. So like she said, it's good to know who you're going to sit in front of, and make sure that you're going to sit in front of somebody who really relates spiritually, because you can be misdiagnosed. And there are others too, other different mental health terminology that we use too in diagnosis, that you can be misdiagnosed, and it really could be a spiritual thing. All righty, so spirituality, we're staying with spirituality. In the field of mental health and spirituality, one common major goal usually is to alleviate emotional suffering and to liberate the blossom of oneself. So for one to come into themselves. Do you all feel, and I want to get each one of you all's viewpoint, do you all feel that this is true and can be accomplished, and why or why not? So spirituality and in the field of mental health, they have that one common goal, which is to alleviate the emotional suffering, so that one can blossom into themselves. So do you feel that this can be accomplished?
I don't think that there's any other way it can be accomplished. If you don't pair up spirituality and the mental health steps that you have to navigate through to get well. I'm sure that people get to a place of wellness without it, because of course there are people who are not walking a spiritual journey. I don't know if it's a complete healing, because I believe that those two are paired up. I think if your spirit man is not addressed in the process of getting well, that you have to take the steps in the natural, it just is, there's a disconnect. I'm speaking from a personal perspective and from what I've seen with people who have gone to seek help through therapists. I don't send anybody to anybody who does not do it both ways, because I know what it did for me personally. I know that God has to do a work and get you spiritually prepared for the steps that you need to take. And if you're working from a platform where you've been spiritually set up to win, then all of that information that you have to intake and you have to apply to your life, you're much better in a position to do that when your spiritual man has been addressed. So I just don't see any way that you can do it without having both. I'm sure, like I said, that there are people who have done it, but I don't think it's complete without God being a part of it.
I think it has to be also a part, just like I think mostly what Ms. Talton said, is you have to be both true to yourself and your most authentic self to be able to get through it, and also to have that spiritual means, whatever it might be, whatever your religious belief or even just your spiritual belief is, you have to have something to give you that faith to get you through and make sure that you stay on the right path with what you need, but also being your authentic self. So those two together will definitely get you there. But you have to, again, be willing to do that and be willing to take that step out, and knowing that it's going to be difficult. There are going to be times when you're not going to want to do some of the things that you need to do to get to where you need to be. But if you want that healing and that sense of self and being where you are comfortable with yourself and feeling yourself, that what you need for yourself to be healthy, that's what you need to do.
I think when you go into therapy, and I'm sure that Pastor is going to go into it a little deeper, but I think when you go into therapy, it's important that the Holy Spirit deals with your mind and your heart to get them ready for what's about to take place. Because in therapy, you have to go through some steps that may not be easy. You may have to hear some things and bring up some things from your past that may not be easy to navigate. So that's why I know that you having that spiritual interaction where the Holy Spirit has dealt with you mentally and he has dealt with your heart, and they are ready. They're on this word that's going to come from the therapist is going to fall on good ground so that you're able to receive it, that you're in a better position to receive it so that you can hear what's being said, absorb it, and now navigate to take the steps to get yourself well.
Yeah, and I believe that the Holy Spirit is so needed in this process because he is the one that leads us into all truth.
Right.
And in order for us to experience that blossoming of our lives, at the core of it, we have to be truthful. We have to be honest with our experience. We have to be honest with our anger. We have to be honest with our bitterness. Whatever it is that we come presenting, there has to be a sense of honesty attached to that, or else we will not get to that place of total and complete freedom and healing. And so because honesty is so important, because truth is so important, I don't think that I will be able to hear and receive without the enabling of the Holy Spirit. Because sometimes there are some tough pills that we have to swallow as it relates to ourselves. Right? We are jacked up. Real time. We are fallen. We are a fallen people. And because of our fallen nature, we can be jacked up. And so it really requires the comforting of the Holy Spirit. Just think of it as a blanket, that blanket that covers us as we're going through these deep, hard places. But without the enabling of the Holy Spirit, man, it makes it so much more difficult. I have secular and I have Christian clients, and when we are able to allow Holy Spirit, I mean verbally, because when I'm there, Holy Spirit is there. Where I am, he is also. But when that individual is able to speak that, to invite Holy Spirit into the experience, it makes so much of a difference. Yeah.
It does. It really does. Good answers, good answers. So now we're shifting gears again, and we're gonna walk down the path of friendship. Does friendship have a positive or negative impact on our mental health and ability to socialize with others? So again, I'm gonna ask it again. Does friendship have a positive or negative impact on our mental health and or ability to socialize with others?
I think I'll probably see once we answer, but I think we may come up with some different things because we may have been looking at it differently. I would say if you have a friendship and you are open with your friend about your mental illness or whatever may be going on with you, that will make them much more able to be able to relate with you and understand what's going on with you, instead of you leaving things unsaid and them not understanding some of the things that happen to you. So that will make the friendship, I think, more strong and more positive in that effect. But on the flip side, if you're not, if you have this friendship, which I don't think you can have a friendship without being at least a real friendship, without being honest with your friend and letting them know what's going on with you, then that can cause some damage and some hurt feelings when things come up, when things aren't addressed or things are not shared, that's going on with you and they're not understanding what's happening with you.
I kind of answered it from both sides. I said, I think that certainly having a positive role of friendship has a positive role in the mental health condition. If you're a friend or you have someone, a relationship with someone who may struggle with mental health, you would be able to be close enough to that person to know when they may go a little bit off, to, so you could see it and you can kind of be there to know what the differences are because you have a relationship with them. But on the opposite, I think that relationships are critical to those who have mental health concerns because they need that connectivity. It's good for them for accountability, and to feel a sense of belonging.
Yeah, and I also looked at that question from the perspective of how it is that my mental health can impede or stand in the way of really forging some good relationships. Because one of the things that, some people, when they are dealing with mental illness, it calls for that sense of isolation. And when we take that disposition, then we're not as open to engaging relationships in a tangible way. I know for me, and I took this question really, really personal, because I know not so much from a mental health perspective, but just from a jump in the deep end of the pool kind of perspective. When you don't have people in your life that are affirming you, that are supporting you, many times you sell yourself short and you don't necessarily take the steps that you need to take for your own advancement, right? And so outside of the context of really having those good, solid relationships, there's so many things that we can miss out on. And so it's really important for the person that's listening who does not have meaningful relationships, right? The question then, is there something that is going on that is a hindrance to you actually desiring community, or can actually maintain community? Because some of y'all are social butterflies and meet a stranger, but how many people do you really call when you're stressed out? How many people can you really call and say, I'm having a moment, and they not be like, why are you calling me? So it's really important for us to understand too that our mental illness can stand in the way of us having those meaningful relationships. So if we're not having meaningful relationships, then we have to figure out, what's going on. Yeah.
Definitely. And it's good that you kind of ended it there, because even those who know me, and if you don't know me, I research a lot of things, and even before I bring it, I research it. And I did want to read because I am a very relational person as well, and it is really good for your mental health. And even though we have some people who sometimes have a hard time making friends or gravitating to others or what have you, studies have shown and proven that it's good for mental health. And I'll just read a little bit, and it says, research indicates having few or no friends is a major diagnostic criterion for a number of psychiatric disorders. It plays back, and it goes back if you don't have people around you, friends. Even your friends, it doesn't necessarily have to be just people that you've met at school or in passing. Your friends can be your cousins. There's a saying where it says cousins are your first friends, but just at least having someone there that you can kind of depend on and talk something through with, or having a positive influence on your life. And it also said that with these psychiatric disorders is presumptive evidence of some disturbance in development. So when you're trying to develop, it plays a part. And it says adolescents do value friends, but it is not clear if the functions of friendships are unique or whether they might be served in other human relationships. It is a concern about the mental health implications of males, because they usually have less intimate friendships than females. Yet little data to clarify that issue part. But there is growing evidence to indicate poor peer relationships in adolescence and even moving to adulthood are predictive or social incompetence. So it builds social incompetence. And you don't know how to function in adulthood if you didn't start having those meaningful relationships, which leads you into a lot of things. And we talked about the risk factors, the depression, because a lot of people can say, hey, I don't need anyone, or I don't need people. But as the song say, from the spiritual aspect, we really do need people to survive. So research and studies have proven time and time again that you do need to start building these relationships, healthy relationships, because then now you're in a malfunction in adulthood, and you become socially incompetent because you don't know how to socialize with people in different areas or facets of your life, whether it's just socializing at a work meeting or socializing even at church if you're on a different team, if you're on a team with somebody. So it is really good to have good valuable friendships and relationships, so that you're not socially incompetent. So with all of that being said, I know we're starting to wind down. We're going to go ahead, Minister Sharita, and take a couple of questions from our viewers.
Awesome. One question that was asked: how can we expose more young Black men to career opportunities in mental health? Is there a need for more Black men in this field?
Yes. Yes.
Definitely, we definitely need that. Of course, I know we are all agreeing with that. And I am lucky in the aspect that at my school, we actually have 2 Black male counselors.
Wow.
Which is rare. But it is good just exposing them to that and allowing them to see that is something that a field that they can go into, and letting them know it's okay to go and talk to someone for help and understanding what their job is. I think that is one of the most important things. Just the exposure, that's the main thing.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely agree.
Totally
This
agree.
is so only 4%, I think, of African Americans are psychologists. And so of that, gosh, I can't even think of the 0.0% that are men. There's such a need for young Black men, old Black men, to be counselors, because many times that is one of the deciding factors that hinders our men from pursuing counseling, is because they don't see anyone that looks like them. And so that's very, very important. Yeah.
And when you take in consideration the social climate of what we are faced with now, and what might be going through men's minds with the fear that they go through, the anger that they go through, you can't think that we could have this type of social unrest and think that there are not men out there who need some form of therapy to try to navigate if they've had experiences if they've had experiences, when they've had experiences that were not the best experiences with law enforcement or even with other people of different races, and how they are able to navigate through understanding or healing those broken and damaged places. And it's already hard to get them into counseling. I just think that we know for sure that if there were more male and more men of color that were in that capacity, that we could at least have kind of get a better platform to navigate them to getting the help that I know that they need.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Because we're winding down, I'm going to ask one more. What are the first signs of schizophrenia in young children?
And I was hoping that you would have asked that question, because in all honesty, we don't diagnose schizophrenia until 18 to like early 20s, like that age group. We don't diagnose children with schizophrenia. So for that parent that asked that question, we would want to know some things like, what are the symptomologies? What are they experiencing? If they're having hallucinations, auditory, visual, what are they seeing? What are they hearing? Those are some things that we would have to ask, because it's too early for that diagnosis to really anyone under 18 years old. So we would just need a little bit more information. to kind of guide that conversation. But again, that's something that you can talk with a counselor about, so you can tease through some of the things that you're seeing to get to a more clearer understanding of what might be going on with that young person.
Awesome. That's
we
all I have, unless you
That's
want me to ask one more.
We can ask one more.
Okay. How can you prevent a teenager from having a mental breakdown when you see the cause that is going to cause them to break down? So basically, how can you prevent a teenager from having a mental breakdown when you see the cause? I guess when you know
what is causing, what the issue is.
Yes, what the issue is. How do you prevent them from having a mental breakdown?
I really, and Pastor Winsome, you have to help me with this. I really don't think you can. I mean, unless there's some way for you to intercede with whatever the cause may be. Even then, that you might think it's the cause, and the child may not see it that way. So that may not even work that way. If it's going to happen, I think it happens. The thing is,
therapist to try to figure out what is the issue, not
right, and then dealing with the outcome of
Right.
what is happening.
And so you're saying for a teenager, and understand that for a teenager, that time of their life is a very peculiar time. And a lot of times we do think that we know, but we really don't know. And unless there is a relationship where they feel comfortable with you to share with you what's really going on, I think that is one of the only ways that you can prevent something from happening, is when you have a relationship, and that relationship dictates that you can have a conversation, and then we can begin to support whatever it is that we feel is triggering that young person that's going to lead to that breakdown. So let's not, just pronounce a breakdown on them, but let's really figure out what's at the core, what's really going on for that youngster. If they're not able to identify what's going on, then we have to have a different conversation, right? But, before we say that this is what's going to happen, let's step back a little bit, look at the relationship, look at what's happening, let's have a conversation, and then make determinations on what are the steps that we need to take further. Because for some young people, yes, they might be unstable chemically. And so does that mean that we need to preempt a breakdown by ensuring that they speak with a psychiatrist, get on some type of medication to regulate their brain function? If that's the case, then let's do that. You know what I mean? But let's just not say that, the breakdown is inevitable, because it's not necessarily inevitable if we can use the relationship to get the information that we need.
Okay, you all, with that being said, this does kind of wrap up our time again, our part 2 with Breaking the Silence, a conversation on the spiritual, social, and educational view and standpoints. At this time, I am going to have Minister Sharita to share the screen. And what I did was last time we had an overwhelming response of viewers who wanted to seek help and get the necessary help that they need. So I came up with these resources and referral options, and it's just names, phone numbers, emails, and websites for some of people that you can reach out to so that you can get the help and the assistance that you need. And I know that you all may not be able to see every name on this, but this will be shared with you all via email, because we do have your email addresses. We're going to email this list to you all so that you can refer to these different places. There are also, I know sometimes, of course, things have a cost, but there are some places on here that do take different insurances from jobs, and also do free counseling too as well. However, if you are working at this time, don't hesitate to contact the Human Resources Department at your job. They have what is called, we call it abbreviated EAP, which is Employee Assistance Program, which they provide a lot of other things, but the main thing I know that we're talking about today is counseling and therapy. But please, please, please don't hesitate. And I know, for example, for those who may be looking for free counseling in the schools, or especially specifically if you have girls, we do with my program offer free therapy, and we actually go into the different schools and we do it individually, and it is only though specifically gender-based for girls. However, there are other programs out, so don't hesitate to reach out to myself, any of the other panelists, if you need information, but that will be emailed out to you all. We do thank you all for joining us as viewers. Before we end, we would like to have our pastor, Pastor Jonathan, to come on, Jonathan Brown, to join us for some final remarks before we end.
Maybe. Good evening, everyone. How are you?
Good evening.
I want to, on behalf of Word of Faith, Pastor Trika and myself, thank you all so much for taking your time out to share the expertise and the knowledge that you have. Truly, it's needed. As the Bible tells us, people are destroyed. His people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. And oftentimes we get so caught up in just the biblical side that we forget the practical side that will help them get healthy, so they can understand what they need to do via scripture and other things. So I want to thank you all so much for sharing your expertise. And I want to encourage everyone that's joined in today, take advantage of what you heard today. Take advantage of the gifts that you hear here, and get yourself better, get yourself healthy. And if you know someone that needs help, be that referral source to them, because it's time, it's way past time that we help our people get healthy. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Pastor Brown, for those remarks. And as always, as I did last time, I do want to leave you all with a little quote. And it just says that mental health is not a destination, but a process. It's about how you drive, not where you're going. And again, I'll read it one more time. Mental health is not a destination, but a process. It's about how you drive, not where you're going. So it's not the end. You can always get help and just access the people so that you can get the necessary help and do the self-work. We've enjoyed you all panelists. Thank you again so much for all your expertise. And good night, everyone.